Everyone, something happened this week that got covered mostly as an energy story, but it's huge. The UAE decided to leave OPEC. That's right. Leaving OPEC, massive headline. You probably heard about it. And everyone's talking about it in terms of the oil, and that's all obviously very important, and we'll explain that too. But they walked out of OPEC after 59 years of membership, right? There was no counteroffer or negotiation or discussions. They just sent a letter giving a deadline. May 1st, they're done with OPEC. May 1st is a couple days from now. Now, the media, again, is focusing on the oil, but if you understand what the UAE has been doing over the last few years, and I've been watching this closely, I just made a video about the UAE a couple days ago. You might have seen on this channel. This is the UAE moving in the same direction they've been moving, announcing loudly and publicly what their vision for the Middle East is. That's what I'm going to walk you through in this video, and we're going to do it carefully. We're going to go layer by layer and show how everything connects, and we'll put the whole puzzle together. So the first thing to understand about the UAE leaving OPEC, you have to see this pipeline that they built. And this is critical to understanding the whole strategy. So years ago, the UAE built a pipeline. Here's the UAE. This is the UAE here, Abu Dhabi, Dubai. This is the UAE. And they built a pipeline from their oil fields over to the east side to this port here, Fujairah. You see this port? This is Fujairah port. They built a pipeline that crosses across the country, and it takes oil out. And this is the key. It allows them to take oil out of the Gulf of Oman to the Indian Ocean without having to go through the Straits of Hormuz. Okay, that's what they did. And they built it as a hedge just for a situation like we're having now. Because they were worried that Iran could close the straits, were worried about the instability in the area, and now tankers can load up on UAE oil outside the Straits of Hormuz and take it out. And what's been happening now with the straits being so disrupted, the Saudis have their own pipeline. Everyone's been worried about oil prices. Now OPEC is a cartel. It's an oil cartel. They control oil prices, and they control oil prices by setting quotas and setting limits on how much oil can be pumped by the member states so that they keep oil prices high enough to make whatever they want to make. And OPEC is dominated by Saudi Arabia, and they were mandating that the UAE cap its production. And the UAE has increased its capacity to 5 million barrels a day, and they're not allowed to pump that much, and they end up leaving billions of dollars on the table, and they have the capacity to pump more. And the UAE did the math, and they're like, why are we still in OPEC? And they decided to leave OPEC. That's the energy side of the story, okay? But this pipeline didn't just change the UAE's relationship with OPEC. It changed its relationship with the whole Middle East, or it's part of their changing relationship with the Middle East. Now, I've been saying this for a long time on this channel and elsewhere, that the UAE is different than all the other Gulf states. They've been making deliberate strategic bets on the Israel-America axis, and they've been open about it, and they've been paying a price for it diplomatically in the Arab world. I mean, think about what the UAE has done. They signed the Abraham Accords. They were the first major Gulf state to normalize with Israel. They weren't pressured into it. They wanted to do it. It wasn't one of these reluctant peace deals like you had like Israel with Egypt or whatever. They were actually into it. They also sided with Israel on the Somaliland recognition when the Saudis and the Qataris and the Turks were all opposed to it. And you know what? Other Arab states like the Saudis and the Qataris and the Turks and the Egyptians, they're always talking out of both sides of their mouths. I mean, the Turks aren't Arab, but a Muslim state, talking out of both sides of their mouths. Sometimes they're pro-Western, sometimes they're not pro-Western. But the UAE has been very clear. They've been making clear choices, and they've been moving into the pro-Western camp, the pro-Israel camp. Let me put it this way. When the dust settles on this period of the Middle East that we're living through, the UAE-Israel partnership is going to be very influential in the entire security architecture of the whole region. There was a headline the other day about how Israel actually was providing Iron Dome missile defense to the UAE. So the UAE made a bet over these years, a bet on the Israel relationship, on a pro-Western, more moderate approach. They've been doubling down on it. And the OPEC exit is part of that game. Let me explain. The UAE is actually building pieces of infrastructure all over the Middle East to create a new alignment. One example of that is another news story that probably you missed. Most people missed it. Is this news story? This is from last week. Jordan and UAE to launch $2.3 billion Aqaba Port Railway. $2.3 billion Aqaba Port Railway. So let's take a look at Jordan and we will understand what's going on here. Okay, so let's go over to Jordan now. Here's Jordan. Here's Jordan. Okay, so Jordan's all the way over here. So why is the UAE investing in a railway in Jordan? So this railway that they invested in, down in the south of Jordan, okay, down here in the southern part of Jordan, all the way down here, we have the port of Aqaba, okay? Here's the port of Aqaba. It's a port on the red that opens onto the Gulf of Aqaba, which leads down into the Red Sea, okay? It leads down into the Red Sea, which then goes down out through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Let's pull back the camera. Okay, the Gulf of Aqaba leads down to the Red Sea, out to Bab el-Mandeb Strait, or out into the Red Sea and up through the Suez Canal. This is a major strategic port. So this is the port of Aqaba on the Jordanian side. On Israel's side, it's called Eilat. Okay, that's what you have there. And near the southern tip of the Dead Sea, you have potash production at Gor Asafi, and you have phosphate mines at Shidia. Okay, let me show you those on the map. Okay, so that's Gor Asafi is right around here. Gor Asafi right here at the bottom of the Dead Sea, and the Shidia phosphate mines are closer to the Saudi border down here. Okay, so they have these very important mineral mines that are there, and then you have the port of Aqaba. So getting those minerals from the mines to the port is currently being done by trucks on congested roads. And the UAE is building a 360-kilometer railway connecting all of it, connecting the mines to the ports. It's a 50-50 joint venture between Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund and the Jordanian government, and the phosphate company, the potash company, the government investment fund, all that. So it's part of a broader $5.5 billion investment between Abu Dhabi, that's the UAE, and King Abdullah of Jordan that goes back to 2023. So the UAE, and the UAE already owns the port rights at Aqaba. They have port rights. They don't own the port rights. They have port rights at Aqaba. So this railway, they're not just building it to help the Jordanians move their potash and their other minerals. They're building the railway to a port that they already have influence and access to. What they're doing is they're building a piece of a supply chain through territory that they are steadily integrating into their orbit, into their supply chain. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because the railway isn't just about Jordanian phosphate exports. Now, let's take a look at the whole region. Let's pull back the camera even more and look at the entire region. Okay, let's really pull back the camera, okay? So here's the whole region. Let's zoom in a little. All right. Now we can really see everything. The United States has been championing and moving forward this major infrastructure vision that is called the IMEC corridor, IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. The strategic logic behind this corridor is very simple. They want to create a land and sea trade route that connects India to Europe through the Middle East as a direct competitor to China's Belt and Road Initiative, which runs through Iran and Turkey, which are two countries that are not in the Western camp. So the United States is building an alternative land route, which runs India through the UAE, through Saudi Arabia, up through Jordan, through Israel, and then on to Europe via the Mediterranean. It's the infrastructure backbone of the new Middle East that America is trying to build. Now look at where the UAE-Jordan Railway fits in. It's the Jordan leg of IMEC. Okay, let's go back. Let's zoom in again on Jordan, and I'll explain more about the railway. Okay, this railway is meant to go from Aqaba up to the Dead Sea, but that's what they're building now. But it is actually meant to continue all the way north up to Syria. Okay, that's the long-term vision for it, towards Syria and the Mediterranean, and southward connecting Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. That's what's supposed to happen. And in its full vision, this is not a Jordanian mining railway. That's not why the UAE is investing billions of dollars there. It's part of a continental corridor that's going to connect the Gulf to Europe overland through friendly territory. And it's going to be anchored by UAE investment. Now, the UAE is not waiting for this to be negotiated into existence down the road. They are building it now. They're building it piece by piece with their own sovereign wealth fund. Now we have to talk about Saudi Arabia, because to understand the full significance about what the UAE is doing and why the OPEC exit matters beyond the oil markets, you have to understand something counterintuitive about Saudi Arabia's interest. Saudi Arabia, and I've said this many times on this channel, you've heard me say it, Saudi Arabia does not want the Iranian regime to fall. I've been saying this for a while. I know it sounds strange because they're enemies, and we know that they were encouraging the United States to attack Iran, but they actually don't want it to fall. Saudi Arabia and Iran are rivals. They've fought proxy wars. There's a deep Sunni Shiite tension between them. MBS, the head of Saudi Arabia, the crown prince, compared Khamenei to Hitler. But Saudi Arabia's entire strategic importance depends on Iran still being a hostile regime. Why does that make sense? Let me explain. Because you have to understand this to understand everything they're doing. So let's zoom in a little bit more on Saudi Arabia, okay? Here's Saudi Arabia. Big country right here, right? See it? There's Saudi Arabia. But we have to zoom back a little bit so we see Iran and Saudi Arabia. Okay, so here's Iran, here's Saudi Arabia. Keep that in focus as I explain. So Saudi Arabia right now is indispensable to the West and to the United States. They have been for a while. Why? Because Iran is a pariah, because Iran is hostile and dangerous and destabilizing. And the West needs a reliable ally in the Gulf. They need a large oil-producing country that can be counted on. Saudi Arabia fills that role. And that's why they've been able to play both sides for decades. Everybody needs them. So if they're not happy with the Americans, they start courting the Chinese, right? The Saudis are always switching sides. Everyone needs the Saudis, but everyone needs the Saudis because, and you can see it just by looking at the geography, because Iran is so toxic. Everyone tolerates the games and the hedging and the double dealing of the Saudis because they need them, because you can't deal with Iran. Saudi Arabia knows this. They're not naive. They understand that their leverage over the West is precisely because Iran is a pariah state. So you can't build a land bridge, a land corridor across Iran if you're the West. That's why China is using Iran. Now imagine that this changes. Look at Iran. Look at it. It's a country of nearly 90 million people, more than double Saudi Arabia's population. Look at the size of the landmass. Look at that. It's huge. Iran is a massive country. And it borders the Gulf, it borders Iraq, it borders Turkey, it borders the Caucasus, it borders Central Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan. It has access to the Caspian Sea and the Indian Ocean. And it has, of course, some of the largest oil and gas reserves on the planet. And despite everything the regime has done to suppress it, it also has one of the most educated, talented, and pro-Western populations in the Middle East. Now imagine the Iranian regime falls. Imagine a pro-Western democratic Iran. Imagine the Iran that Reza Pahlavi, the crown prince, has been describing in his public statements, led by him or not. Imagine that you have an Iran that recognizes Israel, that ends support for terrorism, that becomes a reliable, pro-Western energy supplier. Suddenly, you have 90 million people, enormous oil and gas wealth, massive strategic landmass, all in the hands of a Western ally. Now, let's think again about the IMEC corridor. Wait a second. If the IMEC corridor is supposed to run from India, and then it's going to do a little bit on the water to get over to the Emirates, then through Saudi Arabia and up through Jordan, Israel, because you got to bypass Iran. What if Iran is pro-Western? Then you don't need Saudi Arabia. You don't need Saudi Arabia at all. You have options. Saudi Arabia becomes less important. The reason that the IMEC corridor has to go through Saudi Arabia is because Iran is a pariah. The most direct and most efficient land route from India to the Gulf to Europe runs through Iran. You don't need to go around. You don't need Saudi Arabia's cooperation. So a pro-Western Iran plugged into the IMEC corridor doesn't just make the corridor more efficient, it makes Saudi Arabia less important. They don't become irrelevant, but they become less important. The strategic leverage is not there anymore. Their ability to play all sides, as they've been doing forever, goes away. The United States no longer needs to court them all the time and tolerate their games. This is why the Saudis want a weakened Iranian regime, not an eliminated, collapsed Iranian regime. They want it degraded and contained, but they want it to remain. Now, look at this. This week, Saudi Arabia has been lobbying Washington to de-escalate with Iran, to back off the maximum pressure, to negotiate. This is from a country that was reportedly pushing for the hardest possible line on Tehran just months ago, with their own authorized leaks to the New York Times saying the Saudi crown prince was urging Trump to continue the campaign, right? And this tells you everything. They're constantly playing both sides, switching sides, going back and forth, because they want Iran weak, but they don't want Iran gone. That's the key point here. And this is where the UAE land bridge comes straight back in, because the UAE is building for the world where Iran is gone, where a pro-Western Iran eventually plugs into the IMEC network directly, and where the UAE, having built the infrastructure in Jordan and elsewhere in this new order, is still a big player in it. Okay? Saudi Arabia wants de-escalation, not primarily because they're afraid of Iranian missiles. They're not so afraid of them, although that's real. They're lobbying for de-escalation because they're afraid of what it will look like if there's real peace with a peaceful pro-Western Iran, if there's real regime change. That's the subtext of everything going on right now. And the UAE's OPEC exit, which is timed to this precise moment, while the whole question of what's going to happen with Iran, and while the Saudis are pressuring the Americans to back off of Iran, they did this now. It's the UAE saying out loud, we're building for the new order. And they're betting on the Iranian regime falling. So where does this leave Saudi Arabia? So they've been watching the UAE build this new architecture for years. The Abraham Accords, right? The UAE signed them, the Saudis didn't. The normalization with Israel, the IMEC corridor that the UAE is a central player in. And then there's the Jordanian investment and the Aqaba port rights because they're part of the US aligned system. These are all laying the foundation. This is the UAE laying the foundation, and the Saudis are just watching. And now they exit OPEC. The UAE walks away from OPEC. The cartel that Saudi Arabia controls and has dominated for 6 decades just lost its 3rd largest oil producing member. Right? The normalization deal with Israel and Saudi Arabia has been sitting on the table. Saudi Arabia has been demanding formal security guarantees from the United States, a pathway to a Palestinian state, all kinds of preconditions. And those demands have kept normalization frozen. But here's the pressure that's building. The UAE is building a new Middle East with Jordan, with Israel, with American backing through IMEC, which then connects to Israel's alliances with Cyprus and Greece. There's a whole new alignment being built. And it has American backing. And every month that Saudi Arabia holds out is another month that the infrastructure of the new order gets built around them rather than with them. At some point, Saudi Arabia has to choose. Do they join the new order, or do they get left out? while everyone else builds the future without them. The UAE's moves, the railway, the port rights, the OPEC exit, they're all making that choice more urgent and more expensive to delay. I've been saying for a while that I think Saudi normalization with Israel is going to come at some point. I still believe that, but I think it's going to come not because Saudi Arabia suddenly becomes ideologically comfortable with it. I think it's going to become because they look at what the UAE is building and realize that there's a big cost to staying out, and that cost is higher than joining. Okay, let me bring this home, because this is ultimately what we're here to talk about. The Abraham Accords were never just a piece of paper. They were a bet. They were a bet that Israel and the moderate Arab states could build a common future together, economically, strategically, eventually in terms of security, which we're already seeing. The Abraham Accords were a bet that the shared threat of Iran and the jihadists and all that, and that the shared opportunity of cooperation with Israel, that all of that was more powerful as glue in the relationship than the decades of Arab rejectionism and the Palestinian veto over Arab foreign policy. The UAE is proving that bet right. Okay, they're building pipelines and railways and a sovereign wealth fund and port rights, right? This construction project in Jordan, walking away from a 59-year-old cartel rather than accepting the constraints of these Arab countries, these Arab states that are staying in an old paradigm they don't want to be a part of anymore. Now think of what this means for Israel. The security architecture of the new Middle East is going to be built around the Israel-UAE axis, with whatever partners choose to join, especially if Iran falls and is part of that too. Jordan's already basically in it economically. They have a major U.S. Air Force base there. They buy their energy from Israel, a lot of it. The path is open for Saudi Arabia to join. And if Iran's regime eventually falls and a pro-Western Iran enters the picture, the entire game changes in Israel's favor in ways that are almost hard to imagine, hard to overstate. I've been saying since the beginning that we're living through a genuine historic realignment in this region. It's not just a military campaign. Everything's being restructured. The UAE's moves right now are more evidence of that. And, it's building new relationships. So the mainstream coverage of this story, just to sum up, will tell you that this is about oil quotas and not wanting to adhere to cartel discipline. It's about that a little bit. It's not really about that. It's about which countries are building the new Middle East and which ones are trying to preserve the old one, right? It's about pipelines and railways and port rights and sovereign wealth funds and a historical realignment. It's about a Gulf state that made a bet on Israel and the Abraham Accords when it wasn't fashionable, and it's now cashing that bet in ways that are going to reshape the region for decades. We're going to keep watching this closely. There's a lot more to say about where Saudi Arabia goes from here and what a pro-Western Iran might look like. And I'm going to do more videos on that, of course. So if you found this useful, please share it. A lot of people are missing what's actually happening in the Middle East, and they need to understand it. So please share this with your friends and make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss any of the videos that are coming. Thank you so much for watching. God bless.